Hey guys, Saf coming at you with another Raid Shadow Legends video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Rotos, specifically an interaction with a blessing that probably needs to be changed a little bit. Now this isn't me advocating for nerfs to Rotos or nerfs to any specific champion. This is actually more about the way that Ward of the Fallen is being calculated, because it is causing an unintended consequence which actually makes things a little bit unfair and a little bit broken. So what am I talking about in specifics? Rotos has this unique passive. If you don't know, you've never used him. Like me, I don't have a Rotos. I'm not blessed with the luck of having meta champions on this account. He has this passive, Spurn Oblivion. So he will decrease the damage from enemy hits so that incoming damage from any single hit will not exceed 50% of this champion's maximum HP. It grants an extra turn if the damage reduction occurs. So what that basically means is you can't one-shot him. For the last 3 years, everyone has kind of like approached him with it needs to be a double hit nuker, which is why there's a lot of values placed on people like Ethos's A3, A2 or A3, whichever one is the triple hit back in the day. People like Constantine, you know, people who double hit on the A1. Those are the champions that had a lot of high priority, especially when it was mainly Rotos in the meta. It's not so much the same now because we have Taras and we have Jorgen and we have a bunch of other champions. But the grant an extra turn is very valuable. So it basically means if you try to kill him and you don't double hit him, he's going to intervene. And then once he gets going, this will pretty much guarantee it kills anyone, because with the right setup, you know, you've got 60% ignore defense. If you get Savage, Cruel and everything, you can get that up to like 90%. You can pretty much with Helm Smasher 100% kill anyone with true damage. Then you get an extra turn if you kill someone. Then you go and use that and it probably kills someone because it hits pretty hard, and you get extra turns on everyone. So if he gets a turn, the idea is Rotos starts going crazy. That's the fundamentals that pretty much everyone kind of knows, but if you don't know, that's why it's such a problem. You proc his passive, you then kill someone, gets another turn, then he kills someone with the A2, and then you kind of lost and he's taken over. You get, as they say, Rotos. Now, how does it work with Ward of the Fallen? So Ward of the Fallen is designed in like this, almost like this last breath mechanic, right? It's designed as like the last man standing is going to do lots of damage. That's the concept that I understand Ward of the Fallen to be. So we start each round with a number of bone armor stacks. You see that little icon, the bone spin around them in the animation in the game. Each bone armor stack decreases the damage that recipient receives from a single hit, then disappears. A champion can have a maximum of 3 bone armor stacks at any one time. It also then at High Awakening, which is around about, I think it's fully 6-star, so a 6-star soul here, it'll deal bonus damage to each enemy hit by this champion. The number of times the bonus damage is inflicted is equal to the number of dead allies. That's where I'm saying that this like fantasy of, you know, he's the last man standing. If everyone is dead, then we do bonus damage. Bonus damage is proportional to this champion's attack, which is annoying, but for Rotos it's fine because he's a hybrid attack. You know, really, if it's a last man standing, you expect defense, but that's not the case. It adds 1 bone armor stack for each instance of bonus damage inflicted. Bonus damage will not be inflicted when damaging enemies through masteries, passive skills, and all other things. So the idea is basically if I'm a 6-star Ward of the Fallen, I stand there, 3 of my allies are dead, I have 3 stacks of bone armor. Every time I get hit, I lose a stack. When I then attack, I replenish all my stacks based on the number of dead allies. Now that's not really how people are using it for, because to be honest, the reality is you can't really set up a scenario to make that work, because this bonus damage is not strong. It doesn't do an awful lot of damage, and then trying to replenish the stacks and actually stay alive when you lose the stacks almost immediately, because the main issue with these stacks is you pretty much lose them straight away. They're pretty much gone, right? There only needs to be like 1 tick of damage and you lose a stack. So it's very easy to remove bone armor stacks. The difference is when you are attacking in high-end arena on the first turn, so the first time you attack them, they have those bone armor stacks. So you have to actually deal damage to get rid of them, which can be a problem. But generally speaking, once you have actually got rid of those bone armor stacks, Ward of the Fallen becomes kind of useless, which is why you don't see it an awful lot in many champions. But where you do see it very prevalent is hybrid or HP based damage dealers. So Rotos is a damage dealer that is based on HP and attack, primarily attack, but HP multipliers in there as well. People like Taras are HP only, and this one is a blessing that gives you HP plus crit damage, and that's the important factor here. It is the best blessing for a health-based damage dealer who has multipliers of HP. Now that can be attack-based with multipliers of HP, like someone like Mountain King would also be very good here, because you get the benefits of both. Now, as you can see, a bone armor stack at rank 5 decreases the damage you receive by 30%. And that's the important part we want to talk about here. One armor stack reduces the damage by 30%. So that's important to note. Now, I just want to shout out Shinny right now, because if any of you haven't caught Shinny's channel, he basically does a hell of a lot more arena than I do. And we were talking about this some time ago, actually. I think we were talking about it in around about February. So it's just taken me a long time to do this video. We were talking about the interaction because Shinny was finding this problem that I'm going to talk about with Rotos, and he didn't know how it was going to work. And he kind of showed me the videos. I haven't got access to those videos anymore, but I just want to give a shout out to kind of say, you know, this discussion that we're having right now, this video that we're making right now, is from that conversation I had with Shinny and the problems that Shinny was having with Rotos and bone armor. So how is it working with Rotos, and why is it a problem with Rotos specifically? Well, we've got two interactions here. We've got one damage reduction from bone armor stacks, and if you're at 3 stacks, that's 90% reduction. 2 stacks, 1 stacks, it is reductive. But essentially, you have a damage reduction from bone armor, and then you have it's almost like a damage halver from Rotos, right? It'll half the damage on the Rotos passive. Now, you would expect them to work together. So what I mean by that is, if I hit someone for 100,000 damage, then bone armor should reduce that 100,000 damage by, let's say we're a 6 out of 6 and we got 3 stacks. It should reduce it by 90%, which means I only deal 1,000 damage instead of 10,000 damage. And then I take 1,000 damage off Rotos, and then that is when it gets calculated in terms of his passive. So it basically means Ward of the Fallen removes the passive from getting an extra turn. You still get the same amount of damage reduction, but the difference is we don't proc the extra turn because we haven't actually dealt more than 50% damage to Rotos, because bone armor has taken away the majority. Well, that's not how it works, because of the way that the battle engine sort of processes things. So there's a concept within the battle engine in Raid called phases. So essentially, whenever you start a tick of a turn and your champion can take a turn, there's different things that happen every single tick. So for example, you could have things triggering at the start of the turn. You could have things triggering at the end of the turn. You could have things triggering after a damage is dealt, before a damage is dealt, after a damage is calculated, before a damage is calculated. You could have things like after you processed something, like placed a debuff. All of these different phases basically define when things happen within the battle engine scenario. Now, when it comes to Rotos, his passive actually fires in phase sort of 51, which is after the damage is calculated. So essentially, if I'm hitting Rotos for 20,000 HP and Rotos has 10,000 HP, then obviously I'm going to deal more than half of his damage. So what Rotos does is it takes the 20,000 at this phase and it removes sort of half of his max HP from it. So what that means is, from attacking for 20,000 and he has 10,000, my attack now only deals 5,000, because that is 50% of his maximum HP. So 15,000 of my damage just gets removed from the calculation. That is done after the damage is calculated. So there's a calculation phase, then there's an application phase. Now with Ward of the Fallen, what's actually happening, I'm just reading my notes here, is it is happening at phase 52. And that is before the damage is dealt. So what ends up happening is, on Rotos, if we have 3 bone armor stacks, we wouldn't expect to proc his passive, because technically we're not dealing more than 50% of his damage, because essentially Ward of the Fallen has reduced it by 90%. But because Ward of the Fallen is calculated after the passive is actually triggered, we get a double effect, and it's actually proccing it poorly, because what is happening is I'll deal 20,000 damage. The passive will then fire and reduce it to 5,000 damage, and it will trigger an extra turn. Then Ward of the Fallen is going to come in and go, okay, that 5,000 damage that's remaining, I'm going to reduce that damage by 90%. So my 20,000 attack is now gone from that full damage down to 1,000 attack, or whatever 90% of 5,000 is off the top of my head. Basically nothing, but you actually are granting him an extra turn. So my issue is not the way that the damage is calculated, because whether or not you did Ward of the Fallen at the same time as his passive is irrelevant, because you would be at that kind of same, that's how much damage you would deal. It's the fact that you trigger his extra turn and still do no damage. That's the problem for me here. You shouldn't get this extra turn if you're only going to deal like 100 damage to him. That's the way it should work. They should be calculated at exactly the same phases, where Ward of the Fallen and his passive is calculated at the same time, so that if Ward of the Fallen actually works, it takes precedence over the skill, right? That's what you would want to have happen. You want Ward of the Fallen to first reduce the damage, then you calculate his passive. If he still takes more than 50% damage after that Ward of the Fallen proc, then you cap it, because essentially Ward of the Fallen is like Strengthen. It's like all these other things. They're all done at damage calculation phase. So it just needs to be changed. That's kind of like the way it was. I wish I could show a video to show how it was working. Shinny did have the video. Maybe you guys can go and ask Shinny the question so that he can show you that interaction. But it's pretty clear what happens. You attack Rotos. Rotos has Ward of the Fallen stacks. You basically deal maybe like, say like he was at 1 star. You get 1 bone armor. That's 20% damage reduction. So normally, if you were attacking a Rotos who's 20,000 HP and you were hit him for 20,000 HP, you would be dealing 10,000 HP. Now, if you were reducing that by 20%, what ends up happening is you attack him for 20,000, it halves it to 10,000. That 10,000 then gets reduced by another 20%. So actually, you're only dealing 8,000 damage to him, and he gets his extra turn. It's just incorrect phasing, and it is a problem for Rotos specifically. I'm not advocating to nerf Rotos. I'm just saying that Ward of the Fallen here probably shouldn't be firing after the Rotos passive. Now, as we're talking about Ward of the Fallen, I do have one slight change I would like the developers to make to this blessing. The biggest concerns and problems I have with bone armor is generally any sort of hit reduces bone armor. It's so difficult to sustain your bone armor stacks that it makes it quite low value. When you compare it to something like Lightning Cage here, which basically guarantees you at rank 1 that you have a 50% chance to protect a buff from being stolen. You know, that's pretty straightforward. You can't really stop it. You can't really do anything. It's very, very strong. Compared to this, where basically you have 1 bone armor and it gives you a 20% damage reduction, and then if I just literally tickle that champion, he loses the bone armor stack. I would change this to go, each bone armor stack decreases the damage the recipient receives from a single hit, yes, then disappears. What I would change this to be is, each bone armor stack decreases the damage the recipient receives from a single hit, then disappears if that a hit was critical. So it means if I bring someone like an Arbiter and I attack someone with an A1, I don't lose my bonus arm, my bone armor stacks because it didn't crit. It would force you to be using your critical attackers against someone with bone armor. It would just add more value to Ward of the Fallen. So I would fix the interaction so that Ward of the Fallen gets calculated at the same time as things like Strengthen and all those kind of things. And I would also make it so that bone armor cannot be removed unless you critically hit someone. Just because I think it means that you have more long-term longevity with the blessing. Very difficult to regenerate these things with people dead, right? You can't actually get these bone armors back, where with Lightning Cage, you basically keep getting a new stack back when anyone receives basically a buff. So every time an enemy buffs themselves, you get another lightning orb back. So it's really easy to get lightning orbs. You get one at the start, and it's really easy to regenerate them. Whereas with Ward of the Fallen, you lose it too easily, and you have to have dead allies to actually generate new ones. So that's what I would definitely do, is I would change that. And I would also make it so that maybe instead of it being the number of dead allies, it should be just the number of dead enemies, right? So I think basically it should just be based on, up to a maximum of 3 based on the enemy or your team, just so that it gives more flexibility to regenerate those bone armor stacks. If you do that, then this is actually quite a competitive sort of damage blessing for HP based champions. Now, if they just, what they also need to do is just go find one for a defense based champion. It's a bit disgusting that really for a defense based nuker, your best bet is taking Lightning Cage, because this effect is probably more valuable than anything else, because there isn't that really any stats with that like defense and crit damage. That's what you'd be looking for, is defense and crit damage, and they just haven't created a blessing, from what I can see, that shares those stats. You have a lot of defense and accuracy, and you have a lot of HP and crit damage, or HP and accuracy, but you do not have a defense and crit damage. So there is no blessing for a defense-based damage dealer. Now, Ward of the Fallen would be a good option if you could actually manage these bone armors a bit better, but even then, it's still not defense primary. So those are my 2 nuggets of information about the blessing there. Basically, Rotos with Ward of the Fallen, if you're not using him with Ward of the Fallen, until they change this interaction, you 100% should, because it's incredibly strong. It makes your Rotos an invincible tank for the first attack that he takes, and it almost guarantees he gets an extra turn, and that's normally all Rotos really needs to get going, is an extra turn into a couple of kills if your Rotos is strong enough. They should 100% change that so that Ward of the Fallen is calculated at the same phase as all other damage reducing effects such as strengthen and in that Rotos passive calculation. And they should also change the interaction here where bone armor doesn't get removed unless you critically hit, and it's easier to generate it. If they do those things, I think the trade-off of losing Ward of the Fallen for Rotos but actually gaining the benefits means that Ward of the Fallen is still pretty good to use, but it just isn't as kind of like, oh, it's incredibly strong on one champion. That's what I'm not really seeing it. It just feels wrong to me. There you go, guys. Let me know in the comments below if you've noticed any weird interactions with blessings. I'm happy to cover them. Happy to look into exactly when things are happening with champions. If you don't know and you're confused, you can 100% put them in the comments and I will take a look and see if I can get an understanding of how things are working. That is why I'm here. That is why I like doing this content. I like looking to understand how champions are working and to try and help the community and help you guys actually know what you're doing. So when you're watching something happen in battle, you're not bemused by what is going on. You actually understand why an interaction is happening. You're going to always, of course, join our HH Minion Mountain Discord or the Hellhades Discord. Both of them are available. We have a Minion Mountain Discord, which is really for the people who come onto the live streams a lot and who subscribe to the YouTube memberships. All of those links are in the description of this video, so you can kind of join them. I'll probably put them in a pinned comment as well, so you can see them. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.